Dan from the True Crime Grapple podcast. And if you're listening to this, you must be a Patreon subscriber. So thank you very much. And today we've got Jim Pitts with us. Now, Jim is one of our writers, and he does a crap load of other stuff as well to help out the brand. Jim, welcome to the show. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Brilliant. So today, for Patreon subscribers, we're talking about your latest episode, No One Wins Tonight, and that is the murder of John Luttig and the subsequent execution of Napoleon Beasley. Big case. First of all, before I get into a few of my thoughts about it, I wanted to know how you came across it.
Okay, well, one of the many other jobs that I do is my main job is I'm a teacher and a coach here in the States. And about 25 years ago, I guess, I took a job. My first coaching job was in Grapeland, Texas. And I show up there and they tell me that, there's going to be a big trial happening this year because Napoleon Beasley was from Grapeland. And so he had just graduated the year before. I never met him, didn't know him. He was in jail by the time I moved there. But it was a big deal. I mean, the town's about 1,000 people, so it was a big deal, that town, the trial that year. So I was living in that town during the trial.
So, I mean, you pretty much, with your background, like you said, you do teaching as your job, but you do coaching as well, as you also mentioned. And you mentioned that to me loads of times too. In theory, you could have actually been coaching this boy, or if not teaching, if you'd been a couple of years before. So that's quite a parallel there almost.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people I coached with that year had coached him just the year before. And I actually watched him. I saw him play a couple of times. So, I mean, I was familiar with him when this occurred.
Were you impressed by him as an athlete? And going on from that, what about your colleagues? Assuming that you might have asked, what did they say about him as a person, as a student?
For the most part, they said he was a great kid until that night. And then once that night occurred, which was April 19th, for about the next 6 weeks, everything went downhill. He hardly did anything. In fact, I remember one teacher telling me that she had to go testify. And one of the things she brought was her grade book. And she had to show, the prosecution wanted to show how everything changed with him from pre-April 19th to after April 19th. But everybody loved him in town. He was well thought of.
And of course, he would have been, I mean, maybe you can put in perspective for the listeners. A lot of our listeners are from the States, but myself not being obviously from the States, sports stars are held in such a high regard over there. And with Napoleon Beasley being from a small town and being the next kind of, he was quite thought of highly in his sports. He would have had quite the following in his town, I would imagine.
Right, because it was a small town. There was about, like I said, 1,000 people living there, and the entire town was basically the whole culture of the town was built around the school, especially on Friday nights during the fall. And he was the star of the football team in 1993. The year before that, or the previous 2 years, when he was a ninth grader and 10th grader, they'd gone deep in the playoffs. And so, mainly behind the two brothers, the other two guys in the case, the Coleman brothers. Yeah. And one of them was a superstar there too, who actually got a college scholarship. And so, in Grapeland's a little bit different town. They do treat their sports heroes as kings of the town, and he was no different.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Coleman brothers there, and obviously one of them you said was a big sports star, and he was held in high regard to Napoleon, actually, or Napoleon held him in high regard. Let's talk about, now, when I read this story and then when I was doing the audio for it, it's hard to, you know, when you do these kind of things, you always think, you always obviously, of course, it's the default is to feel for the victim and the family. And we must always, treat that with great respect when we're doing this sort of thing that we do. But I found myself feeling sympathetic to Beasley within this story. And I think a lot of that was because of him trying to get acceptance within his own race and his peers within his own race. He was mixed race, I believe, wasn't he? And I
No,
just found that.
he wasn't,
Oh, he
but
wasn't.
he wasn't. No, he hung around with a lot of the white kids in town. Wrong
That's
way.
right. That's right. Thanks for the correction.
Okay.
Where I was going was, he was getting a lot of aggro off of the black kids because of his
Right.
relationships with the white kids, and he liked white girls and all that sort of stuff and whatnot. And the reason I kind of drew sympathy from me was, here's a kid, clearly parents, hardworking parents, and parents that had achieved, and his siblings were also as well high achievers. And you've got this kid who is a sports star within his town. He's got a bright future, but yet he just can't seem to fit in within his own race because they had an issue with him liking white people or hanging around white people. For me, that was a sad, sad part of the story because obviously, that's not what we want in our society today. How do you feel about all that?
Yeah, it's something that we really don't realize because we think of racism as being almost just black and white, and we don't realize that there is some sort of I hate to say racism, but I don't think that's the right word. But there is some sort of how you're looked upon within your own groups, and I
A prejudice, maybe
yeah
prejudice.
yeah that's yeah that I can go with that. So you don't really realize how much pressure he was under until you get the proper context for what he was in. We'd like to live in a world where nobody really thought one way or the other about whether or not he dated white girls or he hung around with white friends or he didn't appear to be black enough or he was looked down by both parts of town because as much as the white it was a very much divided town by that certain street and
Mm.
they didn't mix outside of school for the most part and he was one that kind of went on both sides of it and so um, for whatever reason, he decided to choose the path where he wanted to be more like one way than the other instead of just being himself. I think if he had just been himself, he would have been fine. He would have gotten out of Grapeland at some point, or very quickly. He was about to go in the Marines. He'd have gotten out of Grapeland and figured out there's a whole lot bigger world out there than just Houston County, Texas.
Yeah, and I think to add to your points you just made there, I mean, obviously Grapeland, you mentioned it before, it was a town of what, 1,400 people or so.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and if it was literally weeks, as you said, that he'd signed up for the Marines.
Right.
And it was literally weeks before he was about to graduate and then head off. It makes it so much sadder. And I hate to, and again, people out there listening, we're talking about the killer here, and that's why this story struck me very much that I found myself sympathizing with the killer. We'll come to the victim at some point. Well, we definitely will. But if he, it's almost like Beasley could have been, if he had stayed strong enough, he could have been a beacon of hope for that whole community to just go down the way that, stay strong, not get peer pressured into stuff, and break that racial divide. If he could have just kind of held his course and believed in his path.
Well, the I left out one of the big stories. I didn't write it down, and I hadn't told you this, but and I really didn't know how to fit it in because it really didn't fit. I was trying to limit what the story I was trying to tell, but there is another story here that's involved with this.
This is what you get for being a Patreon subscriber, by the way. These little tidbits.
I'll save this just for the Patreon subscribers. The town of Tyler, in which he committed the murder, which was 70 miles north of Grapeland. It's a town at that time, probably about 75,000 people. And it actually had shown up before in the KFC murders, very briefly. It's famous right now. It's famous. I don't know if you know who Patrick Mahomes is. Quarterback for Kansas City. Yeah, but that's where he's basically from. He's basically from Tyler. And not too long after Beasley murdered Mr. Ludding, there was another murder of a 63-year-old black man by 3 white teenagers, or 18, 19-year-olds, young adults, who basically shot this guy because he was black and killed him. These 3 guys all got less than 40 years each. Mm. And this was literally weeks after Beasley murdered Ludding. And so there's been a lot of people upset in the area that Beasley, with no criminal history before this happened, got the death penalty when he committed a crime as a 17-year-old, whereas these guys were 18, 19, 20, and basically committed the same crime and got less than 40 years. Mm. And so that's always been underlying this whole case. At the same time, under the state of Texas law, Beasley committed the murder while he was doing another crime also, carjacking, which made it death penalty. And the other guys, at the time, 1994, killing somebody just because they were black wasn't death penalty case. That changed a couple years later, especially after the James Byrd murder. But it's just always bothered some people in Tyler that Beasley got the death penalty and this guy got 40 years.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there that, obviously Beasley would have had to have served life anyway, probably without ever getting out if he didn't get the death penalty. But looking at his record, and you mentioned an ex-colleague there who went to court to testify with her report cards and whatnot, clearly this guy had some sort of hope for rehabilitation. Yes, I don't know, man. It's let's talk about the victim.
Okay.
John Luttig. Now, obviously, they had an inkling that they were being followed.
Right.
And obviously, you're pulling up in your driveway and you have 3 kids running out at you, and one has a gun, and then there's, you didn't have even time to think about it, to do anything. It was over very quickly and very, very violently as well. We must say that and respect what happened in that there, and not wither away from that, despite everything we just said about Beasley. Right. What do you think? What do you think the legacy of John is in regards to this case and the area?
Well, I think with his son being so well thought of, his legacy is probably his children. I think his daughter, travels the world as a photographer. It's hard to find a whole lot of information about her, other than when she testified. And then, and I think his wife died several years ago, who did survive the shooting by pretending to be dead. But I think for the most part, it changed, I think, some of the ways that we looked at carjacking. And I tell you, it always made me kind of reconsider whether or not I wanted a nice car, because the story that we had always gotten about this case, uh, before I really researched it, was that these three guys, they went to a town called Athens first. That's what I'd heard at the time, and they were trying to find either a Lexus or a Mercedes, and they didn't have any success. They went back the next night to Athens, didn't have any success. Drove on to Tyler, found this Mercedes, the Luddings, and I remember it kind of worried me, because all I was thinking about was the only thing the Luddings did was drive this car, and it was a 10-year-old car at the time, at least. I think it was, I think it was an '84, and so I mean, it wasn't a flashy car, but it was a Mercedes, and they were targeted only because they drove a Mercedes.
Mm.
I've since found out that they actually went to another town first, Corsicana, which is actually very close to where I live now. And because there's a junior college, or 2-year college here that the Coleman brother had gone to at one time. And it worried me, because I had a friend that lives in Corsicana that drives a Lexus. And it just boggles my mind that you could be targeted for your car.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's something that we don't really, being obviously from Scotland, it's not something that you kind of hear about as a big sort of thing over there, carjacking. Gosh, I don't even think you hear much about it in Australia too much as well. But big thing over in the States. Do you think, just going off the actual topic a little bit, do you think games like what's that game?
Grand Theft Auto.
That's the one. Thanks. Do you think stuff like that glorifies carjacking?
Well, yeah, yes and no. Yes, it does. It does glorify it. I mean, that's the object of the game. You win the game by committing crimes.
Mm.
Well, you really went to go to a minefield on this one, didn't you? Uh,
Well, we haven't even got to the death penalty yet, so
I think that I think it does glorify it. I think it does condition people to that it's not.
desensitizes them a little
Yeah,
bit.
it's just that. There you go. Another. I'm the writer, and you come up with all the good words. It does desensitize them to them. I mean, there's too many reports here of these shooters that refer to things being like a game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whereas I think the if the general public at large knew how to handle the games like that, it'd be fine. I don't have a problem with it. But I think the problem is, with a country this big and this much access to it, at some point, another big debate right now, is it mental health or is it guns or whatever? There are going to be mental health people. There's going to be some people that don't have the right mind anyway get access to these games. And so,
yeah, and these games, arguably could desensitize them more, and it could be a tipping point for them. I mean, who's to say? And I guess we just don't really know too much about it. It's something that, when it's like movies. I think it's something I might have left out of the James Bulger case, but there was a theory that back in the day, when this all happened with James Bulger, that they were blaming the Chucky doll movies because John Venables, one of the killers, who by the way I heard on the news today, could be paroled in a few weeks. So we'll have to get something up on the Facebook page about that. But he could be paroled in a few weeks' time, and James Bulger's father is coming out already and saying that he's on the track to kill someone else. So, and we'll have to look more into that. But the theory about movies being a tipping point as well, and that Venables had apparently watched a lot of these movies. And it's the same with games, because apparently I think in one of the Chucky movies, they run the doll over, the train runs over the doll or something like that. So that was the theory, was they were trying to reenact that scene with poor James. Yeah, I think more
I,
research needs to be done into all
I
that
think
sort of stuff.
I think games are probably worse than movies because with games a lot of it is first person
Mm.
where you're actually putting yourself in that situation. Whereas movies, I think most people have the can look at a movie and say, hey, that's up on a screen. I'm not in it. I'm just watching that happen. Whereas the
Mm.
games are more first person type deals.
Yeah, you have more interaction with the game. You're actually, yeah, I agree. Um, all right, well, let's Judge Michael Luttig, obviously John's son.
Right.
Obviously, quite a high-ranking guy, in the judicial ranks. Done very well. Got an interview with President George W. Bush for a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court. Very successful guy. Um, how how much do you think his standing within the system swayed the decision with Beasley, as in terms of the death penalty?
I think it was huge.
Mm.
You know, at the time, of course, this was '94. We didn't realize all the behind the scenes stuff he had done to help, like uh, Clarence Thomas get on the Supreme Court. I just remember hearing that he was an appeals judge in Virginia. Didn't realize that within 10 years he'd be on the short list for uh, George W. for the Supreme Court.
And
And
that I would imagine that's quite a meteoric rise.
yeah, I mean he was seen as this up and coming rising star, especially in the Republican judiciary. And now, did I go into what he's doing now? Did I go into that too much?
Yeah, he's a lawyer for the Boeing company, I think
Yeah,
we meant. Yeah.
yeah. He was the general counsel for Boeing for years, and then when all the stuff with the planes happened, he is now basically he's not the general counsel anymore, but he's basically advising the CEO on how to proceed with all this problems with airplanes. And so, I mean, he's still big time here in the states. People don't realize it, but he is.
Yeah,
But
sure thing.
I think it had tons to do with Beasley getting the death penalty.
Sure. And well, okay, well, I guess we'll have to round things off with talking about that, and we won't get into the death penalty itself, because that's we could do hours on that sort of thing. The decision, though, I mean, I'm looking here at your scripture here, and I'm just looking at Beasley's last statement that read in part, and I'm going to quote it real quick. The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless. But the person that committed that act is no longer here. I am. I'm not going to struggle physically against any restraints. I'm sorry that I'm here. I'm sorry that you are here. I'm sorry that John Luttig died. And I'm sorry it was something in me that caused all of this to happen. No one wins tonight. Obviously, by this time, after all the appeals had gone through, or hadn't gone through rather, Beasley knew that he was about to be executed. Talk about your thoughts about the tremors that this sent, because it sent through Texas, and if not on a wider scale, America, because we know that the EU even got involved. You mentioned that. And obviously activist groups against the death penalty got involved from far and wide around the world. But how about locally? How did you see it?
Well, being here in Texas, especially at that time, Texas was and I had debated on putting this in the story, but I just kind of ran out of time about the number of people that had been executed in Texas in 2004. I mean, there were less than 6 months. I think he was already the 20th person to be executed in the state of Texas that year, and maybe the third or 4th or 5th or 6th or something in the month of May alone, and so it wasn't that big of a deal here. I mean, I think most of the protesting about his age came from outside the state, outside the United States. I think Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu weighed in on it. The EU weighed in on it. Amnesty International was real big in trying to get the execution stopped. And the United States, a year or two later, ended executions of people who committed crimes before they were 18. I think it was just like 2 years. And Beasley, I think, did get one thing right. Nobody won that night. But nobody won the night that Ludding died either. I mean, I didn't put a whole lot in the story, but if you go back and read his son's statement, victim impact statement at the trials, they're very emotional and very moving, and you really kind of get to understand what the pain the Luddings felt losing their father and husband so soon. And Google. I mean, I'm sure you can Google it and find it. Texas Monthly does a lot of great stories about true crime and in the state of Texas. And if you just read the son's victim impact statement, it gives you. So Beasley was correct. Nobody won that night. But the rest of Beasley's statement, I thought, was a little self-serving about, this isn't the person I am now. Well, sorry. Ludding's not the person he was either now because he's dead. So.
Yeah, no doubt. And I have to admit, I didn't really see it like that. I saw it differently. I thought he was very, very remorseful, but obviously it's easy to say that when you're about to meet your maker, and it's a shame he didn't.
I think he did feel remorse at that point. I think it took him a long time to get there, and I think he wasn't the person that he was 10 years before. But it just it was, I hate to be cliche, but too little, too late at that point. I think it was only the Ludding's daughter that was at the execution, and the impression I got was that she just didn't. The statement came out after he was executed. He didn't make a final statement. They asked him to see any final words, and he said no. They asked him if he wanted a final meal, and he said no. Yeah. And so then his lawyers released this statement after he was pronounced dead.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that had escaped me. But now you've triggered my memory. He was asked in court if he wanted any final words, and he could easily have turned to Luttig's daughter, who was in the courtroom, and sorry, was that at the execution? I forget. It was one of the other, but yeah, he could have said something to her then, and he didn't have the courage or the remorse, even take your pick, probably both. That's debatable, to do the right thing and actually just turn around and say something to that poor woman. Any more thoughts to wrap up on this, Jim?
Well, I'm weird about numbers and how things fit together, and I started off the story talking about all the things that happened on April 19th. And I'm just sitting there, and I thought this was amazing. And I tell you what kind of triggered this for me was when I watched When They See Us on Netflix. And they were talking about, and I remember that incident happening back in 1989, which was 5 years before this case. But when I was watching the series, I'm looking up the dates and everything, and trying to figure out what I was doing at that time. And I thought, oh, wait a second, April 19th, that's the same day that Beasley murdered Ludding, that same day. Oh, wait a second, April 19th, the same day that the Branch Davidian place burned in 1993, the year before, which was I live near Waco also, and that was a huge deal here. And then also, and then 2 years after Branch Davidians, 1 year after Beasley, was the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19th. And if I remember right, the Columbine kids wanted to do it on April 19th, but for some reason they delayed it a day to April 20th in 1999. Charles Manson was given the death sentence in 1971. Of course, Charles Manson had a real big part in Mindhunter season 2, which I know you just finished.
But well, I finished it before you because you had Big Brother to watch.
Yeah, I know. but most importantly, on April 19th in 1775 was the date that the American Revolution started, in which we won our independence from the British. So I'm a history person too.
Oh, good stuff. This has been fun. Jim, well,
yeah.
Like I said, when I opened up, we got here, we finally done it. Hopefully we'll be doing it again. Hopefully I'll have you back on for my one, maybe even we can chat over my episode. That'd be awesome. And thank you, patrons.
What's upcoming? What's upcoming besides Napoleon Beasley? What we got next after that?
Well, we've got a story from Lauren, who's meant to be submitting one to me tonight or tomorrow, which I'll start recording. And then I have started writing on the bucket list killer, girl called Gemma Lilly, who had it on her bucket list to kill someone by the age of 25. A story from out here in Western Australia.
When you find the weird, well, there's a lot of weird things out in Western Australia, but you find the weirdest stories. I mean, the one about you know how I feel about the one about the cannibal wanting to be eaten. I mean, that was the creepiest story I've ever heard.
Oh, I know. It was. Had you never? We haven't even spoke about that really, but I mean, that didn't make it to the States. You'd never heard of that?
No, well, at least I hadn't. But I mean, I've kind of talked about my next one too. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but on my next, you'd never heard of the one that I found. You know what I'm talking about? Lauren, when I talked to Lauren the other night, she loves that story. She knew the story that I was looking at. So I hadn't heard that story, and it was just, I mean, that was the creepiest. That was just, between that one and the little boy, that was just too much. I mean, you get the weirdest stories. Of course, talk about Mindhunter. Did you keep thinking about the boy or kid when they're? I won't give too much away about Mindhunter, but
spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Did you keep thinking that in your head when you're watching it?
For I'm not with you for what one? Oh, of course for the got you. Yes. Well, actually, I didn't really think it didn't come up, to be honest, in my mind. I was kind of just so immersed in the show. I think. I think that's gosh. I mean, we might have to come. We might have to do an episode on bloody Mindhunter. Who knows?
Because you know, and this is what got me. We're watching that. We finished it yesterday, and a lot of it deals with the Atlanta child murders, which happened in 79 through 81, which I was the same age as those kids at the time. I was, in 1979, I was 10, and by 81, I was 12. So I was right there in that range. And I remember how much it just terrified us, 1,000 miles away. And I was talking to my wife about it, and she was like, "Is that a real story?" I'm like, "Patty, yes. You don't remember the Atlanta child murders? I mean, it was a huge deal. And it changed the way we started looking out. I mean, that's where I think that really changed us from, not worrying about hitchhiking to also now thinking about stranger danger. So, I mean, we could do a whole episode on the Atlanta child murder as far as I'm concerned, because, I mean, that is one of the most fascinating stories of all time, I think.
It truly is. It's unbelievable. And I think I'm going to have to look into it. But what brought with the season of Mindhunter, what it jigged in my memory was I think it might have been like a short TV season or short TV movie, perhaps of the Atlanta child murders. I don't know. It's something I remember from many years ago, probably even 20 years ago. And I just remember the scene of a car coming around a corner with kind of darkened windows. And rolling up to a kid and enticing the kid into the car. And I'm going to do some research and actually find out if that's what that was based on. I have to try and find it first, but that was the memory that kind of came back to me. But I tell you what, some that we've got a lot to do, and it's obviously, and folks, just in case you're unaware, Jim is in Texas, I'm in Melbourne, Australia. So logistically, trying to get Jim's he's up for work in 5 hours, probably less than 5 hours now. So it's been hard. Yeah, less. So it's been hard to get this kind of stuff up and running for you. But if we can pull it off, I would love to do Patreon only episodes looking back on the KFC murders, on Bath, even James Bulger, all that sort of stuff, if time permits, if we can get around to it. But we're going to wrap it up here. Thanks a lot for being a patron, and I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time on True Crime Grapple on the free feed. Stay safe out there, and Jim, you want to say goodbye?
Oh, thanks for having me on tonight here. You're right, I do have to be working a couple hours, got to deal with 140 teenagers in a couple hours. So, but I enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. I hope that everybody listening to it has enjoyed it. So I'd love to talk about the KFC murders. As you know, I didn't go into it in the story, but I do have a even more personal connection to that story than I do Napoleon Beasley. And that story kind of led me to the Bath Massacre, surprisingly. And the Bath Massacre, to me, was just, as a teacher for 25 years, I'd never heard of that one. I'd even ask people today, what's the worst school massacre you ever heard of? And they tell me Columbine, Sandy Hook. So Bath was fascinating too. So I would love to come back and talk about those sometime.
We definitely will do that. All right, Jim, thanks again, and talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.